There you see a look at the teams ready to show down. I think players are shuffled up, right? I see players gripping cards. Pete Ingram looking at his Is It Phoenix decks. Looks like we have the names reversed. We'll get that squared away for you just in a moment.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that did come up when I was talking to Frank and the rest of his team was that they were really looking for an Andrew Jessup Monarch token.
Okay.
And I inquired about that, and they're like, well, Steve Rubin, he's the Monarch this weekend. And, yeah, sure enough, playing Death and Taxes and Legacy.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's the name of the card? Palace Jailer? Is that the often played one?
Yep.
Yeah. Monarch is a weird mechanic, isn't it? Like, seeing it being part of the Legacy format, it's always jarring when I see the Monarch token in play.
It's cool. I do like it. It is, yeah, just weird when it comes out of like a Commander set or Conspiracy set or something like that when these cards show up where it's like, what? I don't remember this being a thing.
Right. In general, I don't check in with these like supplementary sets very often. And it took me a while to understand that the Monarch also let you draw cards as well. I didn't understand that for a long time.
I mean, that's the important part.
That is the important part. Absolutely. And I was like, why are people playing this? Oh, now I get it. So there you see Will Pulliam leading off with the classic turn 1 Ancient Stirrings from Amulet Titan. Going to go ahead and pass the turn back to Pete Ingram. He's going to do the classic Is It Phoenix stuff. How about a cantrip? It's going to be Serum Visions here. Taking a look at those top two. I think I saw a Pyromancer's Ascension there for Ingram, floating amongst the top two cards.
Pyromancer's Ascension, not a card you see in every single Is It Phoenix list, but it is a card that's catching on a little bit in popularity as it's being touted as the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah, and I think rightfully so. It really does change the terms of engagement for the Mirror. Speaking of changing the terms of engagement, how about a main deck Hornet Queen from Will Pulliam? That's a new ad for these Amulet players.
It's no Zakama.
It's so much more than Zakama. So much more. I'm a Zakama hater if you haven't gotten the memo yet.
Hornet Queen seems pretty nice, though.
Yeah, into this metagame in particular, it seems like it could do a lot of work.
You need some flying blockers. I mean, Hornet Queen is the best thing that you could possibly do.
Right, and a fine response to an already flipped thing in the ice. Obviously, you don't want to play it into one that is still ready to go.
Yeah, whatever. You just recast the Hornet Queen, right?
Assuming you get the window to do so. Always a question mark against this Is It Phoenix deck. So we'll just content to go ahead and play a bounce land. Not one of those explosive Amulet starts that we've seen in the past, but Amulet can play a slower game too.
Yeah, maybe hoping for an Amulet of Vigor off that Ancient Stirrings.
Pete is going to go ahead and deploy that Pyromancer's Ascension we saw floating around the top of the deck. Again, this is a scary alternate win condition for a deck that's just loaded up with cantrips.
I think so too, but this isn't the matchup for it.
No, it is not.
This is going to let maybe Pete draw a bunch of cards, maybe copy some lightning bolts, but ultimately those are the types of things that you want to be doing in mirror matches and like slower, grindier decks, whereas Amulet can fight through it pretty easily, I think. I
think that's a good point. Also, things like Bajuka Bog out of the Amulet deck to directly deal with graveyards. So let's see what it's going to do for Pete here. Will, with the basically slowest possible start, was able to find a turn 1 play, but then had to go tap land. So really taking a while to get going for the Amulet deck. You know, one of the tricky things about Amulet is just figuring out what hands you're keepable. And the question is, can you keep a hand like Will kept? The answer is yes, because he had the Ancient Stirrings. This hand, just based on the number of tap lands we've seen, is probably super explosive if he was able to hit Amulet in the top 5 cards of his library.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is weird for him to have a Forest and then also just not playing a Zeus on this turn either. So I think he was really banking on trying to find an Amulet.
I think so. Meanwhile, Pete going to go ahead and put the first counter on that Pyromancer's Ascension by virtue of a second copy of Serum Visions. Can you get Ascension up on the screen? Ascension's kind of like a slow burn, right? It just takes a while to get going. It's doing nothing as soon as it hits the battlefield. And then as soon as you get that second counter on it, it's time to go. And all of your spells get supercharged. And generally the game ends pretty quickly from that point when Ascension is live.
Yeah, it is still kind of tough, though, because this is not really the matchup where you just want 10 cards in your hand. And most of the cards in these at Phoenix deck do the same thing. They just draw cards, filter your library a little bit. Ideally, what ends up happening is you find all of the Arclight Phoenixes and find a way to deposit them into your graveyard and bring them all back. And that way it can kind of increase your clock, especially if you have a Lightning Bolt to kind of cap it off.
Right, fire off a couple copied Lightning Bolts and Pete, with a very quick activation of this Pyromancer's Ascension, untaps and does the thing by virtue of having 3 Serum Visions over the course of this game. Not bad from Pete Ingram.
Yeah, Pyromancer's Ascension forces you to build your deck in a certain way where you have to play a lot of similar copies of the same cards in order to get the initial counters on Pyromancer's Ascension. So generally the lists that have Ascension end up being a little bit cleaner. You don't see like random gut shots or a random lightning axe or whatever. And this is exactly why, because you draw 3 of the same card with Ascension, suddenly it's online. Will's draw is a little bit slower, and he's under the gun now.
Yeah, and Will, you see showing respect to that Ascension, going to go ahead and deploy an Engineered Explosives. Oh no, I'm sorry. This was a transmuted Telaria West, so he wants to deploy an Engineered Explosives, has not done so as of yet. This is not what the Amulet Titan deck wants to be doing at all. This is a very reactive posture from Will.
Yeah, when you're talking about Amulet becoming one of the top decks in the format, it's not based on these draws.
No.
For sure.
No, absolutely not. And maybe that's another knock against the Amulet Titan deck and why it hasn't been picked up to the extent you would expect, is that when it fails spectacularly. You're like, what is this deck doing? How could this possibly be a top contender in the format? Well, because when it succeeds dramatically. Manamorpho any good when you have active Pyromancer Ascension in play?
I would argue yes.
Okay.
I think it's a bold stance, but now it becomes a ritual that also draws you multiple cards.
Turns out that's decent.
So let's see if Pete can actually convert this into a win. He has 2 copies of Manamorphos and a Snapcaster Mage. Some Faithless Lootings. He's going to go deep this turn.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that Pete doesn't end this turn in a dominating position. And that's why something like going to get that Engineered Explosives, the damage has been done. Pete's graveyard should be stocked. His hand should be stocked. Meanwhile, over in the Legacy match, Steve Rubin up a game against Collins Mullen in the Death and Taxes versus Teamer Delver matchup. That's a classic of Legacy. Throwback.
Oh, yeah.
Going back maybe, 5-6 years pretty easily. Teamer Delver's starting to make a resurgence in Legacy. We're just going to let Pete do his thing for a while here. You see another Manamorphos. That means more mana, more cards. Pete has 73 cards in hand right now, I believe.
Give or take.
Yeah.
And it can't feel good from Will's side of things to have your opponent be casting like these Serum Visions and Ops and just routinely keeping all of the cards on
Right.
top.
Yeah, I think Will's disappointment with this game has persisted over a few turns now, really starting with that turn 1 Ancient Stirrings that didn't find anything useful. Just not a lot going on the Amulet side. So there's one of those lightning bolts. Again, that'll speed up the clock dramatically. Looks like we're going to fire off a Thought Scour here, put a bunch of cards in the graveyard, draw some cards. Oh, did you see that? He drew the Arclight Phoenix off the top.
Mill over, Manamorphos, and Lightning Bolts.
Right. Pete does have Faithless Looting in hand, so I don't think this is going to pose all that much of a... In fact, he has 3 Faithless Looting.
Yeah, and
hand, so.
this is certainly the correct sequencing, right? You cast all your blue cantrips, draw a bunch of cards, and then you use Faithless Looting to discard any Arclight Phoenixes you found.
Yep.
And then maybe finish things off with Lightning Bolt. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see if Will gets another turn after this. I don't think it really matters, quite frankly. I have a hard time composing a win from Will's current board state based on how he's played the previous turns.
Yeah,
so.
You start the turn with 4 mana and no amulet that we know of or anything. It is very tough to actually deal 20 from that spot.
Right. Almost certainly no Azusa as well. So here's the copy of the Faithless Looting. And that's going to go ahead and look at a couple more cards. We've got 2 of our Phoenixes in the graveyard. Meanwhile, over in our standard matchup, Robert Stanley takes a game against Frank Skarren. There we see the Sultai midrange versus Mono Red Aggro. One of the reasons Mono Red Aggro never really found an initial foothold in this format was the Sultai midrange matchup. A very challenging one. If anyone can navigate it, it's Frank, but still a tough matchup for the Mono Red side.
Yeah, I agree completely. Sultai is tough. Obviously, a lot of it hinges on what part of their deck the Sultai player draws. If they draw all Wild Growth Walkers and Explore creatures, they're golden. But if they draw the Vivians and even Hydroid Crassus early is not very strong.
Right.
But I do think overall things are definitely in Sultai's favor. Wild Growth Walker is very tough for them to deal with, and they're not even playing Lava Coil main deck anymore. They can't afford to.
No, they cannot. And they're basically looking to dodge that matchup. You can get bigger in post-board games, and you'll find your lava coils then. This isn't best of one on Arena, so options still available. Pete still hasn't played a land for the turn, meanwhile. Going to go ahead and deploy that now. Time for some more blue cantrips. It's going to be Thought Scour, targeting Will. Now, Pete has 2 copies of Surgical Extraction in hand.
In hand? He has 3 in his deck list.
Yeah, two in hand. Nothing super exciting with the mill from Thought Scour there. No prime time, ready to be taken out. But here's another copy. Going to go ahead and target Will one more time. Kind of a whiff again.
Yeah. I like this line from Pete, though, because it was pretty clear that he's not going to be able to kill Will this turn once he's down to Island Sulphur Falls, because at best he could Thought Scour himself, bring back all 4 Phoenixes, attack for 12, and then he only had enough to Lightning Bolt once, which would leave him dead. So this gives him kind of a backup out where if he just milled over Primeval Titan, that wins the game, effectively.
Right. Yep. Pete knows that Will has Engineered Explosives in hand. It'll be interesting to see if that changes what he targets. And he is going to, in fact, target the Engineered Explosives, getting the one out of hand. If I was Will, I'd probably just scoop here rather than give Pete a look at exactly what's in my deck. I mean, I know you're sideboarding, but I don't know. There's really such a small chance of coming out of this alive.
Right. I mean, you know that Pete is going to end up with 2 Phoenixes this turn, and you're going to be at 14 life, and the hand does not enable a kill. And I guess there's just not even a card that you can draw, right? Like, even if you draw Amulet, you can't make 6 mana. If you draw Azusa, that doesn't help either. So
correct. Yeah, no possible way to get to Primeval Titan on this turn. So I would have packed it in here, but ultimately a pretty small decision. Like we said, we are going to be going to sideboard games here, so maybe you even want Pete to see some of the cards that are in your deck to kind of alter his expectations. Who knows?
Surgical Ascension is kind of funny, especially with 3 copies in Pete's main deck. It's like you could just strip them of everything if you don't have anything else going on, but obviously that's not ideal, not what you would like to be doing. But
well, it just goes to show why this Phoenix deck has found such success. Its plans continue to alter. It continues to offer new little wrinkles to its game plan, such as this Ascension package. And, you know, I was down in the feature match area a few rounds ago. I was watching Andrew Ellenbogen play Phoenix against Ad Nauseam. He was on a deep mulligan and very slim outs, I would say. Certainly some fear of what the Ad Nauseam player is capable of. So he fired off a Thought Scour at his opponent, hit one of the Ad Nauseams, had the Surgical Extraction in hand, and just took the Ad Nauseams out of his opponent's deck, and his opponent scooped.
Yeah, no way to win from that point, right?
No, it's nice to play to your outs. I mean, you could do like Simian Spirit beat downs if you wanted to, but let's be real, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Kind of interesting, too, from Pete's side, where you see the hand, you know that Will is not capable of doing anything next turn, and Pete actually took out the Ancient Stirrings and Explosives from Will's deck. I think at that point you know that both of those cards are dead draws, right? You just leave them in the deck, right?
Right. Pete didn't bring back Phoenixes?
Yeah, I forgot.
Just skipped it?
To be fair, he took a lot of game actions.
Yeah, he did. I agree, but those were kind of the important ones.
Those are the important ones, but
I don't think it's going to matter. Again, there's a lot of like edges being gained here. I think we have 2 lightning bolts in hand, so you just fire off those lightning bolts, cast one other spell, and we are looking at lethal at that point.
Yeah, if you play Bolt, any other spell.
Well, we're going to play Faithless Looting here. There is another mountain in hand, though. So
okay. So not cutting himself off a red mana. There's another Phoenix. Thought Scour your opponent again for funsies?
Well, you already know everything that's in the deck, so you can probably skip it here. I think Pete just wants to go ahead and close off the game here. Doesn't want to skip those Arclight Phoenixes again. There is 12 points of damage at your face. Here come 3 Arclight Phoenixes. Throw them directly into play attacking. That's going to go ahead and do it. So Pete Ingram up a game against Will Pulliam's Amulet Titan. Now we get to go to the sideboards. I want to start on Pete's side because the first card already giving Amulet players in the room sweats. It's 2 copies of Blood Moon, 2 Dispels, 2 Ravenous Trap, 2 Spell Pierce, 1 Abrade, 1 Snapcaster Mage, 1 Chandra Torch of Defiance, kind of a newer add into these decks. You see a Shatterstorm there, looking to answer the War Prison decks. Rending Volley, Beacon Bolt, and Threads of Disloyalty round out Pete's sideboard. What are you bringing in here, Jerry?
Obviously, Blood Moon is the card that scares Amulet Titan the most.
Yes, it is.
And they have ways around it. They have Basic Forest, they have Coalition Relic, they have Summoner's Pact for Reclamation Sage, but still, if it's on the battlefield, it's a nightmare. Pete also has 2 copies of Dispels to fight over the various pacts in the deck, Pact of Negation and Summoner's Pact, which are a big part of Amulet's engine, and then also fight over sideboard counterspells. You have Spell Pierce to tag early cantrips or amulets. A Braid can either take out Azusa Sacro Tribe Scout or Amulet of Vigor. And then, if you want to get fancy, you can do stuff like, I'm going to board in a Chandra, expecting the games to be a little bit slower post-board, maybe Beacon Bolt to have an out to a Primeval Titan that has resolved. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but it's mostly hinging on the counterspells and the Blood Moons.
Absolutely. Let's head over to Will's side, where we're looking at 1 Tireless Tracker, 1 Reclamation Sage, a Ramunap Excavator, Engineered Explosives, Chameleon Colossus, 2 copies of Primal Command, 3 copies of Negate, 4 copies of Path to Exile, and 1 copy of Tragic Arrogance. Jerry, what are you doing here from Will's side?
You're the Amulet expert. You tell me.
So one of the reasons we've gone to white in the Amulet deck is for Path to Exile in this matchup. Obviously, the cleanest of answers to the Phoenix. I certainly expect those to be coming in. We'll probably expecting the Blood Moons to come in as well. You can bring in the Reclamation Sage. Hope to get out of that lock, but it's always scary when you're facing down Blood Moon from your opponent. It generally is a KO. You want to really do your thing ahead of time, and since Will be on the play, has a chance to win before Blood Moon can even come down. So that's what we'll be looking to do here. Negate, questionable. A lot of this stuff is up to player preference. I think the clear slam dunk are the Sages and the Path to Exiles.
You like all the paths?
I do like all the paths. I just think it's important to stop your opponent from having those really explosive starts and just clean up what they're doing. If you get some time, you'll be able to do your thing, assuming they don't just Blood Moon lock you out of the game.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I could totally see that.
So, Jerry, if you are looking for the hottest information and what's going on in the world of Magic, why not check out the Star City Games newsletter? There's extremely, extremely handsome authors that often contribute articles to it. You'll see highlights from those articles, some of the upcoming SCG Tour dates and locations. Also, a good way to keep track of invitational qualifiers. We talked about SCGCIN. You want to make sure you're qualified. You can also head out to SCG Game Night. And, of course, always free. Head over to go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. Go ahead and sign up.
I thought you were going to make them change that picture of you, though.
No, whatever. They can run it for as long as they want. That's actually from my GP top 8 in Atlantic City.
Okay.
So it's got good memories attached to it, even if I look like an idiot in it. But we'll still let it ride.
Look, man, I think people can say that we've both had like questionable hairstyles and facial hair choices and
Absolutely.
Stuff like that.
They get way worse than that, too. I mean, that at least, like, I look like a somewhat presentable human. I have, like, glasses on. You're like, oh, okay, this guy, little questionable taste in beard, but ultimately clean cut, good fellow. If you go back, like, 5-10 years before that, there's just some horrible, horrible pictures you could find. So let's hope that SCG never does that.
Well, in my downtime, I'll go searching for those pictures then.
Well, one of the good things, Jerry, about being old is that when you make these horrible missteps in your youth, they're not necessarily recorded all over the internet for posterity.
Yeah, maybe you got like some VHS tapes lying around or something.
Hopefully I have smashed all of those and they no longer exist, but who knows? Maybe there's some information out there. I'm going to do my best to try and keep those pictures out of everyone's hands.
Your parents don't use Twitter, do they? I think that's like the only way I could probably get in contact with
my
them.
parents don't even have smartphones. And
nice.
They don't have a regular cell phone plan. So, no, you are out of luck when it comes to prying into my parents' technology.
Jonathan Rossum had some interaction with his mother on Twitter, and I was like, okay, great. Now if Rossum misbehaves, I can just go straight to the source and be like, look, you have to handle this.
Oh, that's great.
Jonathan is out of control.
Yep. It's always good to have those outs where you can go directly to the parents. But like I said, I am often grateful for my age and experience, and that is one of the reasons why both having parents that aren't necessarily super plugged in and not having a lot of my past missteps forever documented on the internet.
You were possibly born at exactly the right time to escape that.
I think so. Player's going to go ahead and draw their openers here. Amulet Titan, a deck that should be mulliganing aggressively, and I think Will did, as we see a scry here. Going to go ahead and put a card on the bottom. I think we're on 6 cards here, so not a devastating mulligan. You're pretty happy to go to 6 on a regular basis with the Amulet deck. Going to go ahead and lead on a tapped Colony Garden.
When you win games with Amulet, you generally have extra resources lying around. So it is very much about finding a specific combination of cards, not so much about finding a lot of them. I mean, every bounce land is effectively 2 lands. You know, you have a lot of built-in card advantage just in the deck anyway. So
Exactly right. Meanwhile, Pete going to go ahead and fire off Serum Visions. This is how the last game started. Will having flashbacks right now. Hoping things aren't going to get out of control quite as quickly.
yeah, I mean, oddly enough, I think Pyromancer Ascension is just one of the cards that you would sideboard out in this
Agreed.
matchup. So
Agreed.
Will doesn't necessarily have to worry about that one, but it is possible that maybe, you know, there's a Manamorphose, a couple Faithless Lootings, and you're getting attacked for 9 by some Arclight Phoenixes. That's almost certainly like the worst case scenario.
Will going to go ahead and follow up with a tapped bounce land. Going to return that Colony Garden to hand. Able to make another plant if necessary. Plant's pretty irrelevant in this matchup, quite frankly.
You could make the argument that it blocks Thing in the Ice, but once it transforms and is able to attack you,
Your plants are gone.
they're gone. I mean, you could replay the Colony Garden the next turn, I suppose. But
You can.
in the meantime, that plant is not doing much.
Let's see if Will has a turn 3 play here, because if Will's going back-to-back matchups without doing anything relevant in the first 3 turns of the game, his deck has betrayed him. I will say that. And it looks like we are going to get a play based on the replay of Gemstone Mine. Is it going to be a Zuza? No, Coalition Relic. New add to this Amulet deck, and I think a very good one.
Yeah, it's not something that you would necessarily expect, but I think it just goes to show that games of this deck play out differently than you might imagine, where most people are just like, oh yeah, you want to play Primeval Titan on turn 2 every game or whatever, but you don't have to. And Coalition Relic allows you, if you have a Sacro Trap Scout, you can potentially play it on turn 2 anyway and ramp to a turn 3 Titan. But Relic gets you to 6 mana effectively by itself because you curve it into the 6 mana for Primeval Titan. And it's a card you can find with Ancient Stirrings, so it kind of bridges the gap that way. It plays entirely around Blood Moon, which is probably the best part of it.
Yep.
Just overall doing a lot of cool stuff for this deck.
Yeah, I think in particular it lines up well against what the Phoenix deck is looking to do. So as this deck has risen to prominence, Coalition Relic has become more and more of a thing. Meanwhile, you see Pete Ingram with Pyromancer Ascension, and he thinks we're wrong. He says it's a fine card in this matchup.
I feel like there are worse cards, but hey. These players likely have far more experience with this deck than I do. So
let's see how it plays out as the match goes on. Meanwhile, over in our Legacy match, you do see Steve Rubin taking the win 2-0 against Teamer Delver. Death and Taxes, big win over in that matchup.
Faithless Looting gets cast. Immediately, Pete discards 2 Arclight Phoenixes. That choice was easy.
Pete's doing his thing right now. He's going to flip that Thing in the Ice if he wants to as well. We'll see if that's the choice. Yep. Lightning Bolt you. Take it to the face. You're going to fall to 16, and I'm going to also attack you for 13 more. Pretty good, right? That's pretty good.
That's not bad.
Yep.
What are we thinking about here?
Scooping.
Will maybe going to path this Thing in the Ice to try and keep his plant around?
Well, if you're pathing the Thing in the Ice anyway, there's no downside in doing that.
Yeah. Maybe it's not entirely relevant, but it's still correct.
Mm-hmm. Pete going to go ahead and find a land here. Will's kind of at that point where he just has to untap and do something. And it has to be something dramatic, like at least Primeval Titan.
Well, it's going to be tough because he had to use the Coalition Relic for mana.
Relic. Yeah, this game may be over before it started, quite frankly. That's a tough spot to be in. At least the clock has been stemmed somewhat. Will going to go ahead and fall to 11.
Yeah, very awkward when you have your sideboard card, the thing that you brought in that is meant to slow your opponent down, and they just present 3 giant threats that are attacking you on turn 3.
Yeah, I think we're seeing good draws from Pete, suboptimal draws from Will. Those two things combining to really give Will a nightmare run in this matchup. Here's another copy of Coalition Relic. So we're generating some mana. You know, if Will gets a couple more turns, maybe we can start to make things happen.
This is sort of a classic macro matchup for Modern, where you have Will, who is mostly trying to do the powerful stuff, right? Whereas Pete's deck is also powerful, but on a smaller scale, but he has the consistency backed by all of the blue cantrips and even the red cantrips like Faithless Looting.
Oh, yeah, very fair point. Meanwhile, Pete drawing a decent card in the matchup. It's Blood Moon. Now, you might say, oh, there's 2 Coalition Relics in play. Will have access to the mana he wants. That's true, but the problem is then you lose all of your utility from your Primeval Titans. They're no longer gaining you 4 life when they come into play. They're just getting completely bricked.
Right, and you can't do things with bounce lands. You can't pick up your Teleria West. Doing things like casting Primeval Titan and transmuting in the same turn are very difficult. You can't Slayer Stronghold. Like, it shuts down your clock a lot.
Right.
And normally, hard casting a Primeval Titan against the decks that previously played Blood Moon, it was fine because they're like Jeskai control decks, Izzet control decks.
Exactly.
Things that had a slow clock. But Arclight Phoenix and Blood Moon, it's a combo.
Oh, yes, it is. It's a quick clock combined with Disruption. Here you see another copy of Thing in the Ice at the ready for Pete Ingram. Frank Skarren also stealing a game over in the Mono Red versus Sultai matchup. One that looks increasingly less likely to matter as this game gets deeper and deeper. I see 2 Azuzas in hand. I don't even think there is a Titan in hand for Will right now. Let's see if Will is able to muster anything on this turn. We're going to go ahead and take those counters off, add a couple mana to the mana pool.
So 2 Coalition Relics means that Hornet Queen is a possibility.
Okay.
Even through Blood Moon. Still, there's a Thing in the Ice, which threatens that, and the Arclight Phoenixes can possibly just come back on the next turn, too. So it would be a grind. It would take a few turns, but it's also likely that Pete would probably just transform the Thing in the Ice before the Hornet Queens actually dealt with the Phoenixes.
Here is a Summoner's Pact from Will. We'll see what he wants to grab. I have to think the answer is Hornet Queen. At least gives you a prayer. Primeval Titan does virtually nothing here. So you always play to your outs. You take your best option. If Hornet Queen is still in the deck, I have to believe that's it. But I think it's a temporary reprieve for Will here. There you see Hornet Queen.
Small bright side to Blood Moon is your Selesnya Sanctuary enters the battlefield untapped.
The smallest of bright sides. The absolute smallest. So there is a Hornet Queen bringing along some tokens with it. Unable to flip this Thing in the Ice. I do have to report this match, currently being played for funsies. Frank Skarren took down Sultai midrange with Mono Red aggro. A tough matchup, but like we said, if anyone can navigate it, it's Frank. And he has done so. Let's stick with this one, though. I want to see if we get an outcome here. And I love that the players are still playing, right? They're just here for the love of Magic. They want to know how this match ends as much as we do.
Well, Pete is widely known as a person who loves his blue spells, right? He's always playing blue cards in Modern. He loves just casting cantrips and doing his thing. And this deck is a little bit more aggressive than his normal deck, but regardless, it is exactly the thing that Pete wants to be doing basically in every game of Magic. And Will is known as Weird Land Guy. He likes playing Amulet. I would imagine that both of these players like playing their decks on camera as well.
Oh, yeah. Both in their element right now. Not willing to get out of the feature match area anytime soon.
We couldn't kick them out if we wanted to.
Right. Here comes a Thought Scour from Pete. Do we already have a copy in the graveyard? I don't believe so. So it is going to flip over, or excuse me, take a counter off Thing in the Ice. Not going to put a counter on the Pyromancer's Ascension.
But the Thought Scour put a Thought Scour in the graveyard, right? I feel like that should count.
I don't think they're going to give you that, Jerry. I don't think the judges are going to sign up for that particular explanation.
I agree with you, but that doesn't mean they're right.
So it looks like Pete just passing the turn back here. Hornet Queen getting to stick on the battlefield. Got to pay for Pact. That's costly. Means it's very unlikely anything all that worthwhile happens on this turn for Will. But let's see what the draw is.
Yeah, still gets the mana from Coalition Relic. So is able to deploy an Azusa at the very least.
Let's see what the draw was here.
Ooh.
Path to Exile.
Looks like white mana is being made off the Coalition Relic, so that's nice.
Okay.
So now
That ups Hornet Queen stock a little bit, able to hold the fort a little bit better.
So now the bees are holding off Arclight Phoenix, and you saw Pete kind of sputter out there on his turn. Didn't get to use all his mana, didn't continue to cast card drawing spells and put counters on his Ascension, so potentially out of gas a little bit.
What's the draw here? Snapcaster Mage, bolt you, Snapcaster Mage, bolt you.
An alternate line, I think, is
And that is going to get the handshake.
bolting something to put a trigger on the Ascension.
Okay.
And then you can